there much interest in the Latin community in this issue?
I get invited to do a lot of interviews. That's what I enjoy. So I do with many different types of movies. Whoever wants to talk, and you folks apparently have a story to tell. So
yeah, sure.
So let me start with the very simple question: is how did this production or film come about? I mean, where did you get the idea saying, "Hey, you know what? I'm gonna make a movie about him"?
Sure. My interest started with the issue of opiates in general. So I have close friends who are physicians, and it was an issue that we had talked about a lot as doctors. They see it every day in their work of people coming in asking for these pills or already addicted to these pills, and it's something they struggled with of how to help people who are in pain, but not create addiction in their patients. And what I wanted to do was tell the story from the perspective of the doctor. So it's not generally how it's portrayed in the media. It's often kind of a fear of oh my God, we're all addicted to drugs, or the big pharma is pushing these drugs, and the story is not often told from the point of view of the doctor. So that was my aim, and when I came across Dr. Hurwitz's story, it particularly intrigued me because the testimonies in this case contradict each other so sharply. So we interview various former patients of Dr. Hurwitz's, and some of his patients say that he saved their life. He gave them these medicines that no one else would give them. It got them out of bed in the morning. And other patients did fall victim to addiction, abuse, and death in some cases. So his case for me it's complicated, it's not clear cut, and it's an interesting window into this discussion.
Now, Doctor, you've been through this entire ordeal for many, many years, and if for a documentarian to come over and ask you to join this project, I mean, why did you want to do it?
Well, I feel that much of the coverage of the issue of pain management and addiction has been wrong-headed and has scapegoated doctors and scapegoated the drug companies and is insensitive to the ethical and practical and technical dilemmas of treating chronic pain and controlling diversion and abuse. So I felt that in some sense it was a continuation of a rhetorical and political and a public educational position that I had taken during my whole medical career from 1991 or 2 when I first got into trouble, so to speak. And it was just part of the continuing presentation. And I thought I could add to the discussion in a useful way.
I'm curious, Doctor. The encounters and the situation that you had was early in your career. I mean, didn't the feds or the government basically scared you enough saying, hey, you know what, I'm going to back off?
Well, maybe someone else would have had that response. But as it happened, the initial issue involved 3 or 4 patients in 1992. And specifically, I came to the attention of the DEA and the Department of Consumer and Regulatory Affairs of the district government for my treatment of a government attorney who had a septic necrosis of his hip, dead bone, as a result of a scuba diving injury. He developed a bend and required high doses of oxycodone, which were then 5 milligram tablets and roughly 100 pills a day. This was reported to the DEA. They came in, they intimidated me. I surrendered my DEA registration and then had a fight with the DEA and the Department of Consumer and Regulatory Affairs and the Board of Medicine to establish my bona fides. At the very time that we had a hearing, there was a headline in the Washington Post doctors unnecessarily afraid of opioids. Pain is undertreated. It's time for us to loosen up. So I had the support that was visible and in the press for what I was doing. And I had paid some attention to the professional discussion about undertreated pain before this event, but the NIH pronouncement and the Agency for Healthcare Policy and Research, which had had issued new guidelines for the treatment of pain, and which were supportive of more aggressive use of opioids, in effect supported the position I had taken. So I felt that I had been vindicated and that there was nothing I had done that was wrong. And in fact, in a sense, I won the case. I got my license back and was able to continue to treat patients. And as a result of my involvement with that and my confrontation with the legal and regulatory regime that governed medicine, I decided to go to law school. I volunteered to become part of an organization representing pain patients. I appeared on a national television program and developed a clientele from all over the country of people who had undertreated pain. So, in a funny way, or a perverse consequence of my initial prosecution, was that I became more of an expert in pain treatment and more committed to what was then an evolving standard of care in which pain was being treated more aggressively with opioid medications.
While you're filming the documentary, you knew Dr. Hurwitz here is going to be a controversial figure. How do you balance out the positive and the negative with all around surrounding him?
Sure, yeah. I mean, I think that was definitely a challenge in the filmmaking. How to calibrate it carefully so that, you're not... I think the trick for me in the film is each character who appears, I wanted to feel sympathetic in some way. So there was something that they would share with the audience that maybe, whether you expected to feel sympathy with them or not, maybe you suddenly saw their perspective. And that was, a careful balance to achieve. So through editing, long process of editing, we tweaked that. And I think, I think people have a lot of different reactions to the film, which is interesting.
Now, the issue of painkillers is currently on the news due to Prince's death, and not too long ago, Rush Limbaugh coming out saying he was addicted to painkillers and everything. I mean, does this kind of change your minds about painkillers, or are we still sticking to the fact that it saves people's lives?
I don't think it changed my mind, but it makes the public dialogue more interesting and richer. That is, even in Rush Limbaugh's case, my recollection was that he had significant back pain. And there's a public confusion between what's, so to speak, legitimate treatment of pain with opioids, even at high doses when people become tolerant, and what's addiction. It's not even clear to me from the story that Limbaugh became addicted, as opposed to simply was using it so that he could tolerate the physical demands of his occupation. I think that the public discussion suffers from a lack of, what should I say, technical distinction and nuance, that the distinctions between tolerance, dependence, and addiction. These are professional terms of art, and they're conflated so that the medications are demonized. I think the overdose of Prince makes it look like fentanyl's a bad drug. Well, fentanyl is a very useful drug. It's used for general anesthesia. It's used for breakthrough pain relief. And what's not clear in the published details regarding Prince's death, for example, is what was the pattern of medication? Where did he get the drugs? How was it prescribed? Whether or not the doctor who prescribed it did it in a rational way that would preserve his tolerance to the medicine, or whether or not it was episodic or sporadic in ways that made it difficult to control. So, I mean, from the perspective of somebody who was used to prescribing these medicines, there's a lot that I'd want to know in order to assess the propriety and validity of what happened.
That's interesting because I think they're going after the doctor, Prince's doctor, for nearly the same situation. I mean, how do you feel about that?
I feel great sympathy for him if he's been the target of legal attack. I mean, I don't know that he did necessarily anything wrong. I don't know what the context was of the treatment. And I mean, what seems clear is that Prince's personal style was a clean one. He was a vegetarian, he didn't drink, he didn't take illicit drugs, and yet he was somebody who was sufficiently physically active through his performance career that he must have suffered severe pain. And treating pain is not per se evil. Treating pain is a useful and necessary part of medical practice in many regards. So, and to criminalize the treatment of pain, even if his doctor was not particularly expert at it, seems to me wrong-headed. That is, at worst, it could conceivably have been malpractice. At worst, and I don't know that it was.
Excellent. Making an indie documentary like itself, you're probably going to face a lot of different challenges. What do you think was the biggest challenge or difficulty on this project for you?
A big challenge of this project in particular is that we're telling a story that took place in the past. So we're, the trial was in 2004, and we're talking about events that even preceded that. So a challenge from a filmmaking perspective was how can we bring those events to life and make the audience feel a part of the action. We talked a bunch about recreations, and I had initially resisted that, but we ended up using recreations in the film, in part because I really wanted to put people in the shoes of a pain patient to say, what would it feel like to have this kind of pain that debilitates you every day? What would it feel like to go into a doctor's office and have their authority decide whether you get the treatment that you want? And same from putting in the shoes of a doctor. So, what would it be like to be sitting in an office and your job is to help people, and someone comes in and you don't know if they have pain or if they are an addict, or what might be the signs you're looking for. So I think the recreations ended up being useful for that end, but it's always a creative challenge of just how to, we have a lot of latitude as documentary filmmakers, and be space for creative solutions.
Awesome. Let me start wrapping things up. Could you talk about any of your future projects after this documentary? And Doctor, you could talk about what's going to happen to you in the future, if you like.
Sure. I have a small production company, and we're developing a few exciting projects right now that will follow up this one. We're excited for what's coming next.
So more about opioid.
No, well, we are not necessarily about opioids. We are working on a 6 or 8 part video series that will hopefully supplement this film. So either drawing on pieces that we talk about in the film, or some of the extra footage and characters that we didn't get to include, and also we want to use it as a way to include additional stories, a piece about heroin, for example, or a piece about addiction treatment, to keep the dialogue going, and use short videos, online as a way to reach a wider audience at this point.
Absolutely. And anything going on with you, Doctor?
Well, pertinent to pain medicine, no. I'm retired from medical practice and probably indefinitely prohibited from ever contemplating returning to it in a formal way. This movie may, however, create opportunities for me to continue to try to educate the public about some of the complexity of these issues, and I'd be perfectly happy to do that.
Terrific. One last question. Obviously, audiences, how we view documentaries and so on, I want to know is what is the primary message that you want to deliver after they finish watching this film?
I think the primary message is that this is a very complex issue, and finger pointing or black and white kind of regulation is not going to be the answer here. That it's a complex issue with many perspectives, and we need to consider those as we move forward and think about solutions or possible ways out of this issue.
Terrific. You want the last word, Doctor?
Ditto.
Thank
Last
you.
word.
That's the last word. Hey, thank you very much.
Look at
That was
that.
a
We
great.
agreed today.